Okay, get started. There's no room host, I guess so. My name's Daniel Reich. I'm going to be talking about this kind of interesting little project. It's something that sort of fell in my lap from doing other IT-related stuff, and been working this for many years, and talking to people about how I managed my online identities. A couple of people suggested I should put together a talk about this and kind of share this and maybe start a debate. So just want to get this out of the way because I work for a large company. They don't want their name associated with this. So this is my own work on my own time. Nothing to do with my employer. If you look at my bio, just because my company was listed on the profile. So first, a little bit of history of how I got involved in this. A long time ago, when .coms and startups were all the rage, I somehow became an email admin. Basically, people were asking me to set up email because I could, and I kind of did it pretty easily, and it wasn't a big deal for me. So I ended up hosting a lot of domains for people who were doing startups just because they needed an email, they were trying to get started, and I could take care of it for them. So basically, I ran this out of my house, and back in the late 90s, DSL was just kind of coming online, so it wasn't a lot of bandwidth. Servers weren't that powerful, and so I got hit with all the other things that come along with hosting email for lots of other people. Was my bandwidth got saturated, got spam, server load, etc. And so, it became more of a nuisance for me at some point, where I was basically doing all this stuff, and it really wasn't what I was trying to do. I was trying to do my own startups at that time. So, I was looking for ways I could better manage this, because this was causing me problems. I mean, my internet link got fully saturated at one point. I couldn't do anything at all. So I happened to come across this idea from the financial industry. They have this thing called controlled payment numbers. And how many have heard of this before? Okay, a few of you. So the idea behind this is it's pretty neat. It's an anti-fraud measure. Essentially, it's a tokenization of your credit card. So when you go to make an online purchase, instead of using your actual credit card number, right, you go to their website, or you have an application, and it generates effectively a one-time use credit card, or it can technically be one merchant as well. So you can use it multiple times, but within the same merchant. And it's sort of a protection measure, right? So if somebody happens to get your credit card that you've tokenized effectively, it's no good to them, because it's either only good with that merchant, or it's only good for one transaction. So this is kind of a neat concept. It's been around. A number of credit card companies do offer this. But it's, it's not very popular. A lot of people don't know about it. So when I talk about this to people, they've never heard of it, seen of it. In fact, I think Discover discontinued it this year. So neat idea, but it's also a pain in the butt, because you have to go to a website, log in, generate a card, copy, paste it. And I guess that's kind of a pain. There are better ways to solve fraud that people are leveraging. And also doesn't help when people do silly things like this and post their credit cards on Twitter. So it really wasn't it's kind of a novelty solution, I think, for the financial industry. I know that there's still some providers still offering this, but largely, it was a neat idea, but probably too technical, and they didn't market it well to the consumers. So this got me thinking, virtual email. Take the same concept, apply it to my email, right? To kind of solve my spam problem and kind of control the load. And what if I gave everyone unique randomized email address? The first thing I would get out of that would be, source attribution if someone were to, abuse that email. So if somebody had if somebody sold my email, right? Think, early 2000s, right? That was probably more common. Or if somebody did have a compromise and suddenly I was getting spam, I could just simply, get rid of the email. But at least I knew where it came from. So, that. So, I thought about, how I can use this, and how I can put it together. And so there are some ways you can do this yourself, right? Gmail, you can add a hyphen and put whatever you want at the end, except that anyone can figure out, drop anything after the hyphen. You have the root account. So I can just keep sending you email there. Outlook does a little better job where you can actually create a new account effectively as an alias. But you still have to go in and manage all those. So you can actually just go generate new, and it's effectively an alias. But what I ended up doing for myself was I took this suite called Horde and modified it, and then added this customization to it. So when you go in and you look at the settings, right, you can define things like when you send an email, here's your name. Well, I just basically added a button to that form that says generate a new alias. And so on the back side, it would call a random function, generate something, and add it to my LDAP store. And eventually I had to move it to RoundQ because I got sick of all the patches on the Horde side. But effectively, it's the same concept, right? Where I have a website, I go, and when I do this, I also add it to my address book. So now I have a means to track it. So as I'm adding these things, I have an address book entry that says this unique identifier is associated with this site. So now I can keep tabs on how I'm using them. Initially, I decided to use 32 random characters. And funny thing about that is that a lot of websites, when you go to fill out a form, they have limits on email length. Including, by the way, the Eventbrite site, if you ever register for a B-Sides event, it's 50 characters. So I reduced it to 16 just because that became a problem. And in fact, some sites are even funnier in that if I use the same user ID as also the login ID, some sites are even less than that. So you can have a user ID that's 16, but they'll happily take more than 16 or more characters when you actually go to log in, but not during the sign-up process. So, for example, there was one site where I had to reduce it to 15. So I basically just truncated it, right? But when I use that address book entry, I have to remember that I truncate it, because if I use 16, it'll take it as an input when I go to log in, but it will say it's an invalid login. So after I built this out, I kind of want to see, well, maybe I can find some interesting stats on, if I gave my email address out, maybe I'd find some interesting ways that people are sharing my information. And so I went and filled out contests. Got some free razors, it was pretty cool. But effectively, I found that these were really not very useful at all. I mean, sure, I got lots of spam from it, but as far as source attribution and finding actually anything useful out of this, it actually turned out to be really meaningless. It was just a lot of noise, and I ended up just deleting all those aliases that I created and kind of moved on. And I continued to use this for every login site, any site that had to create a login, I continued to generate random IDs. And it actually took many years before I actually got a really good, interesting result, because I was offered a job. And this was kind of neat. So this is the first real sort of incident that I found where I had some abuse of an email address. And, clearly this is very legitimate, of course, right? So looking at the headers here, right, I found my email address, which if you're going to send me spam to that, I've already deleted it since. But so that was very interesting. I'm sure no one, happened to randomly guess that one. But since I had this in my address book, I went and looked up where this came from. And to my surprise, it was actually the Wall Street Journal. So this was 2009. So I emailed them, sent an email to them, to all their accounts I could find, abuse, etc. Didn't get any response, but I kind of pieced together what happened here was that I had signed up for a promo sort of deal with the Wall Street Journal, and so it was done through a third party marketing company, and apparently they had a breach, and so their account data was stolen, and so therefore my email started getting spread around. So, clearly here I could attribute this back to its source. I had never used it anywhere else except with that marketing company when I signed up for a subscription. So, found a few more along the way as well. Demo recorder. It's a site. It's a product. It's a German company. In order to download it, or a trial, basically, you have to fill out a contact form, and they send you a link to download. Well, the form is actually a third-party company, and so I emailed. It's a one-man show. So I emailed Christian, and I asked if he knew about this, and yes, he didn't. So he went and looked into it and found that, well, maybe it was tied to this marketing company, and he reached out to them, and sure enough, they actually did have a breach. Never bothered to tell him that, but he had found that they had a breach, and all his customer data had been stolen. How long that had been going on, I don't know, but presumably it's been out there for some time. Similarly, Geeks.com also had a breach. Now, this is a retail site, so this is a place that I've given them my credit card, right? So, a little higher risk for me in that I'm giving them potentially information, if they're retaining it especially, they could be abused to cause me harm. Similarly, again, with all these different incidents, they each had their own unique email address. So it got me thinking about how I use my logins and what if I do reuse my passwords? Because I have a lot of accounts, and yes, I use PasswordSafe for things that are really important to me, but I have a lot more accounts than I care to deal with, and I really don't want to be, messing around with having to pull open PasswordSafe every single time. So it got me thinking about how I can better use this tool so that I don't worry about passwords that I've reused. And so I've basically partitioned my accounts into a couple buckets where I have things that I really care about, and I will use strong passwords in conjunction with these randomized login IDs and randomized email addresses. And then there's everything else where I might have a password theme based on the type of site it is and what kind of information I let them store. So if they have my credit card on file, maybe I'll use a better password. If they don't, maybe I don't care as much. So it's, this is something I've been doing for a long time. Over 10 years now, I think. I actually don't remember when I started doing this, but I have 451 email addresses right now. So, if I find they're being abused, I delete them. A lot of them are really stale and just, they're silent. Yes?
What passwords do you use for the randomized email addresses?
So for the random, it depends on how I bucketize them. So if, for example, it's a retail site where I don't let them keep my credit card info, I have a stronger password, but I might reuse that across multiple shopping sites.
Is it?
But this certainly doesn't enable them to have access to any of my other accounts, because remember, if they have my login ID or my email address and that shared password, so let's assume they have my password, they have a login ID that's unique to that site, they have an email address that's unique to that site. If they wanted to go after my email to find all my other emails and login IDs, it's an alias in the system, so you can't log in with that account. So, and there's nothing in there that would give you any indication as to what the core account is. So again, it's just randomized data. So it kind of confines the attack. So assuming that they have my information, they still can't progress further. So I've contained a breach at that point, hopefully, right? And so it's allowed me to be a little bit less stringent as far as how I'm managing all these accounts. But at the same time, it's kind of a pain in the butt. 16 randomized characters, right? Typing that in, especially when let's just say Spotify, right, or Pandora, right? You have to have a login, and so my login ID is randomized. And so what I've kind of pieced together is basically a process for coping with this, in that I have it in my address book. So if I'm at a PC, I can just go look it up in the address book, copy, paste. It takes an extra 20, 30 seconds for me to do that. It's a little bit of a pain, but it's readily accessible. And it's also a little bit different. I'm going to touch back on that and why it's kind of different and how it's, why I think this is actually interesting. But on the iPhone, of course, I may not have access to that address book so easily, so I can just go search my inbox. So I probably have an email that was sent to that account, so I'll just make sure I save an email, and then I can just pull it up really quickly, copy and paste that, and then do my login. It's also kind of fun when you're kind of interacting with merchants. So I've had this happen a couple of times where checking out from a hotel, and they want to move away from paper. So it's kind of fun when they pull this up and they want to look, send you, and they want to confirm your email address for your invoice. And if if I feel like I want to have a little bit of fun with them, I'll actually have them read it out. It's also interesting in that I've also had it work the other way, where I signed up to get access to my health records. And so you go to this website, you fill out a form, you put all this information that identifies, your medical record ID number, et cetera. And then someone has to actually go review it. It's not an automated process, so it takes a couple of days. And so I went and filled all this information, and then I got a call back. I got a call from the healthcare provider, and they said, we have this request for for an account, and it looked really suspicious to us. Can you confirm that that's actually you? And I said, you mean the login ID and email address? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, yes, it's legitimate. So sometimes people pay attention, but mostly it is kind of fun to see how people react to that. Yes.
You mentioned you use Password Manager, but it's not convenient to pop it out every time. Why don't you store passwords in the browser, like Chrome?
Well, so it's not necessarily. I'm not always using one device, right? So I might be logging in this MacBook. I have a desktop computer. I've got my iPhone. I've got a tablet. I'm pulling up accounts in a number of different places. So I really want to have something that's a little more portable. Sure, I can keep it on a, if I use a password manager, I keep it on a USB stick, right? And I can carry it around with me. Of course, that increases the risk of me losing that stick. Or I've also had this happen to me where basically my USB stick got damaged, and I wasn't as good about keeping it synced with a repository where I could keep a backup. So I've lost a few passwords that way as well. Right. Right. And so for me, it's a comfort level, right? And I just don't trust third parties. So the reason I host my own email is because I don't trust other people to do it, that I want to own it and I want to keep it in my possession at all times. It's just my personal comfort level. Obviously, I'm sure a lot of other folks feel differently.
You said you have a button to click to generate your email when you need it.
Yes.
Does it automatically store it in your contact list, the header and name and everything, or do you have to copy and paste?
No, it saves it into my address book with a description of where I used it. I don't show a timestamp of when I generated it, but if I really want, I've never had a case where I've been curious about when I generated it. I probably have an email from when the account was created, but it.
Automated the process.
Correct.
Copy-paste.
Right, and so right now the form that it's in, it's more of a hack on top of the webmail system. I am planning to compile this into an actual plugin that I can release, and so once I have that done, I'll publish that out so that if you do run Roundcube, you can take this and install it. Of course, it does require, if you aren't hosting this yourself, that whoever your provider is has to accept that and provide the necessary privileges to your back-end LDAP store to allow those modifications. Yes?
I was going to point out that you could also set up a catch-all. Right?
Yes.
And then you won't have to set up a distance for one.
So I do have that as well. And that produces, I do get a lot of other interesting stuff that comes out of it because I see, and I haven't really understood why I get this, but I get a lot of email. So on another domain that I have, I get a lot of email addressed to just random characters. I don't know why. A lot of them have Excel spreadsheets, oddly enough. But these are things I've never used before. I don't know how somebody came up with it, but it's just random. And there's a lot of different random, number letter combinations at that domain. So, and that's also a nuisance as well. But the other interesting thing that I have found with this is that, so far I've talked about sort of the outgoing flow of information. So I'm logging into a website, but there are cases where whoever I'm interacting with isn't contacting me. So case in point, if I provided my contact information, phone, email, both home, cell, etc., to say my credit card company, and they have a fraud alert, and this has happened to me when I'm traveling overseas, they'll send me an email. They'll try and call me, and so sometimes, all right, I definitely don't get the calls, and so I'll see the email, and so this is another way I can also validate that it's legitimate, because some of these emails are if you're just looking at the subject and the from, in the summary, do look fairly consistent, fairly legitimate. You really have to open it up to take a look. So, but it allows me to very quickly dismiss it because it wasn't sent to the correct address. So it's, and for me, it's pretty easy to spot some of those emails, but for other people that, for example, like my wife, who I've gotten to use the system, she can easily spot if it's a fraudulent email or not, just because it wasn't sent to the right address. Yes.
You can also set up rules too.
Yes.
And that's nice too.
Right, and I haven't worked on that yet, but that is a good idea, and that's something I've thought about is basically auto creating the rules to go along with it. So the catch is identifying all the potential domains that it might be coming in from. I've noticed that some places use multiple domains, and I don't always have them configured correctly.
Like I said, if it's to a specific one, because if it's coming from this, I know it's from. I know
Right. Yeah. I mean, exactly. No, that's absolutely legitimate. It's the things I've thought about as well. It's just things I haven't gotten to yet. So, this seemed like a really good idea when I built this out. Basically what I'm talking about here is using your login ID as keeping it secret, right? It's not, it's no longer public information. I'm saying use your login ID as another factor in your authentication that should be kept secret, right? That you don't share with everyone. And, obviously it goes without saying, right? Don't expect security if you're going to reuse your passwords or your login IDs, because if I can get hold of one account, I probably can get a hold of other accounts. This is just a way of me of moving out of the way of the target. So when I put the picture of the running bulls there is that, there's a lot of, what I see is a lot of people implement security because, best practices, they kind of follow what everyone else is doing. These are generally accepted principles. And sometimes maybe it's not a good idea to follow what everyone else is doing, that you might want to do your own thing. And so I kind of look at this as sort of getting out of the way. And, when somebody does get access to one of these accounts, they're going to look at it, probably spend a minute, probably it's scripted, I would imagine. And they're going to move on because they're not going to find much value out of it, and there's easier targets. Yes?
I understand that you're randomly generating email accounts.
Right.
And you may or may not reuse a password depending on level of security.
Right.
When you refer to reuse login IDs and passwords, my experience is that I can have a user ID, a password, and then an email address that they use to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
Which one of those are you referring to with the login ID?
So in a lot of cases, the login ID will just simply be the user ID portion of the email address. So I just basically strip the domain off, and I'll use that as my login ID. So they're somewhat linked in that regards. Because at the end of the day, right, when you sign up for an account, they want an email address and they want a login ID. Having two separate ones doesn't really, I didn't see a good reason to do that. I thought about it, but I couldn't find a good reason why I should. Right. Yes?
Are you ready for big questions, arguments, or do you want to save that till later?
I think I know where you're going. So let me.
You know what I'm going to say?
I do. So let me get to my next slide, because I think that'll probably make this a little less controversial. This works for me. I don't think it'll work for everyone. it's just something that I have used as a tool to better protect me. I think some other people could use this. I can't see this becoming a mainstream offering, to be honest with you, right? It requires a trust in, for most people, it's going to be trusting a third party. They're going to use Outlook, or they can use Gmail. And that becomes the point of attack then, because if I want to get all your accounts, I'm just going to go after that email. And so since I'm not a big provider, people don't, attackers generally don't know me. Maybe they do now. I'm going to have a lot more interesting connections to my servers. But, it works for me because I'm just sort of getting out of the way. And my hope is that, I'm not prescribing obscurity as a primary factor, but it's a means for me to get out of the way and let somebody else, take the hit, right? If I'm in the woods, right, and we see a bear, right, I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun the slowest person. So that's really what my goal is, and really, protecting myself. Certainly, there's some interesting lessons learned, but I haven't figured out how to make that sort of a mainstream. I think that some folks might be able to use this. So, so that was all the content. Let's get into the big question I know you're going to ask.
So the big question, my experience, I think a lesson from history, is that bad things happen if you try to take stuff that was never designed to be a secret and start using them as secrets. And the best examples, or maybe the worst offenders that we have of this, are credit card numbers and social security numbers. We've got systems where these things were never designed to be secrets. And then slowly various people and institutions started using them as secrets. And we're in a situation where people are using things for secrets for systems that were never designed that way. And we've actually gotten ourselves into a mess. And so I'm extremely hesitant. I'm wary of schemes like this.
And I understand. And the difference is that I'm not entrusting the third party to reinvent the use of things that weren't designed. It's something I'm doing myself as a means to have control over that. So if I have the option of giving you an email address, right, it's going to be something that's not tied to anything else. So the whole point of this was really to protect myself and give me a means to control that. There's a lot of information that I'm retaining, and I need some way of managing it and keeping it sane. So I agree that you never want to take a system that's designed for a specific purpose and try and reinvent it in some fashion that it really was not designed for. But a lot of these sites where you are signing up for accounts, they are asking you for an email address and a login ID. And if you strictly speaking, if you want to be secure, you're going to give them their own unique combination that would be never used anywhere else. And that's all I'm seeking to enable. And so yes, it's a modification of the system to enable that, but it's really all I'm doing is adding an alias and having a means to track it. Now, for sites that I care about, right? If it's a financial site, I will still use a very good password. I will keep it in the password vault. Absolutely exercise, good hygiene. But I have over 400 accounts that I've signed up for. Most of those I don't care about. If you get my, if you can log into it and do something with it, I really could care less because there's no financial harm to me. At worst, it'd be like a mosquito bite. Okay, just, kind of clean up the account a bit, but move on. I don't have to go and change passwords at all these other sites. And it's really just making it easier for me because I don't worry about if there is a compromise at a site. That's great that you have my password. I don't have to rush out and change anything else. And it's a buffer for me that adds some protection. And as I said before, it works well for me. It can work well for individuals. Very hard to apply. But I think the larger topic that the larger thought that I want to bring out of this is that, since we are relying on these unique identifiers, right? How do you identify yourself, right? Is, how we generate user IDs, is that really the direction we should still be going in, because it's a critical component, and we made it public. Maybe that isn't the right approach. Maybe we need to think of a different way of identifying ourselves uniquely, such that it would not be non-obvious and non-reusable. Yeah.
So, I mean, how we can talk about this.
I think you're warming up to the idea, at least.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of virtue to what you're doing. I mean, people who have been dealing with spam have been doing this for almost 2 decades.
Right.
And so there's a lot of history to this. And also, of course, if you're trying to defend against various sorts of fingerprinting, using different usernames everywhere, makes it hard for people who are trying to connect various instances of you. So there's definitely merit for those specific goals.
Right.
And then we can argue about the others. I was going to ask you if you were familiar with something that existed a few years ago and sadly died, papernapkin.com.
No, I didn't hear. I'm not aware of it.
It was a mail service that somebody set up primarily for, well, usually women who were who couldn't get rid of some guy paying attention to her, or asking her for a phone number and email.
Sure.
Until she actually gave an email. And it was set up so that anything at paperNapkin.com generated an auto response that says, the person who gave you this email does not want to hear from you. That's why they gave you this email.
Right. There's a similar, I think, phone number service as well that did the same thing. Yeah, I think, what I was hoping to kind of get out of presenting this really was to kind of prime that discussion around, well, how can you take something like this and make this more applicable, right? I think it's the user ID concept that I'm looking to change. I don't know how to change it. This probably won't extend, but there's probably some other means, and it would probably also require participation from all these sites that are generating and storing account data. But I think that the notion of using your user ID to just something that you put out in the public, maybe that time has passed. Maybe when you think about something new, yes.
So I had a couple questions. One was for the sites where you tend to go back, like Amazon, for example. Do you cycle that user or email address on your account periodically, or do you just basically stick with whatever you're generating?
For the most part, I generally keep the same. Once I've given them an email address, I will keep it, unless I have reason to think I should change it, which I have done on occasion, especially when accounts start to get spam. Right? I just don't want to deal with it. But it's your log entity is effectively, I treat it as public. Right? It's just out there. It's not stored in any secure manner. So I don't treat it like that. But it's just I just use it personally. I just use it to allow me to make it disappear. Basically, like the paper napkin site. Once I've decided that I don't want it anymore, I delete it. Removes the alias from my LDAP store, and it's gone. Anything that goes to that bounces.
The second question I had was over all of the hundreds of accounts that you set up. You mentioned that you sort of put them in buckets as far as the kind of use.
Right.
Categorically, or just broadly speaking, can you say, sort of statistically, this use case is more apt to end up being compromised or spam or whatever than
Right. So I haven't dug into the statistics on how much spam was tied to some of these random accounts.
I mean, one would
generally
that, like the one-time promotions and things would be more likely to.
Right, but that's me deliberately giving out my information as opposed to, well, I'm signing up for something very specific. I signed up to get access to a forum where I want to post a message, right? And then somebody stole the the account database for that site, and then they're using it or trying to use it in other ways, and eventually probably gets leaked and somebody starts using it for spam. I haven't dug into how many of those are common, because a lot of times once I hear about that, I will go in, change the email address, delete the account, and just kind of move on. And it really just comes down to, it's a little bit of me being lazy in that I don't necessarily always have time to go through all my emails. So if I see a notice from a site saying, hey, we've been compromised, everyone needs to change their passwords, I will go in and change my account at the same time. The email address, and if I can, I'll try and change the login ID as well. But for the most part, I'd say the majority of those aliases that I have fall into the bucket of I really could care less about them, because they're going to be sites for, I wanted to download something and I had to give them an email address to a forum or something that I don't care. I have a really simple plain password that I'm sure is in a dictionary, but that's okay. I've accepted the risk of that. And then I have a sort of a next bucket of where I do conduct transactions. I buy things, but I don't let them store information. So I may reuse a strong password there. But it's at least going to be a strong password in that case. And then everything that can really harm me, I totally separate. Yes?
I think this is a noble goal, and I think if you could get this implemented, everybody could use it to single-handedly eliminate the online marketing and advertising and promotional business. So I think...
Thank you.
I was telling someone last night that I know so many people who still have AOL accounts, and it's sort of cool now to be vintage AOL. And they have one account for everything they communicate with.
Right.
Whereas you're on the opposite end of the spectrum of disposable accounts.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds as though, unless I'm missing something, that it's still compatible with 1Password or other
Yeah,
things.
right. This is just an enhancement to other good hygiene practices. Really, it's we always I always hear people saying, well, we describe security as an onion, right? You have many layers to this. This is not a tool. This is not a tool that's effective by itself. It's only effective in conjunction with others. And again, I just want to outrun the bear, or outrun the other person who's being chased by the bear.
I had one
Yeah.
thing to add, if you don't mind sharing. We use one credit card for anything that we don't do in person.
Mm-hmm.
And so it can be by telephone, email, what have you. But, and so that credit card statement, is more likely than the others.
Right. Right. I mean, in general, right, with credit cards, you're exempted from liability, right? They'll assume if you identify the fraudulent charges. So I don't worry as much about that anymore, because you call them up and say that this wasn't me. They'll cancel the card. They'll remove the charges. It's 5 minutes of my time. It's done.
It just so
Except for when you've got to change the numbers.
Exactly. Right.
Not 5 minutes. It goes on for months.
I agree.
We have hundreds of transactions every month, and they're segregated this way. So your Amazon example, they're on the net card,
Right.
bills that we pay.
And that's where the control payment numbers, I thought, really would have been a good solution for the industry. And it's kind of surprising that that's never really gotten a lot of adoption, where you can just say, I'm going to generate a card. It's good for a year. I can set a high limit as to how much can be spent over the lifetime of that card, and I use it with one merchant. So great, it gets stolen. The only risk there is that if somebody breaks in the merchant and orders more stuff from that merchant and changes your address, right? But then if you have any compromise, well, again, you've given everyone a unique credit card number, and I just have to change the one. So there are still companies that there are still financial companies that do provide that. I think Citibank might still do that, but you kind of have to dig around to find it. So, yes.
Have you encountered or considered any implications with respect to like credit bureau stuff? Because they're trying to tie more and more of this stuff together, and it seems like you're a nightmare scenario for data brokers and things like that. So
Right.
Have you run into scenarios where it's become difficult for you to take credit, or that seems unlikely?
No, I mean, because as far as credit, they always go off of your social, and and they generally, I guess, from a background check perspective, maybe that might cause some interesting results. I've had over the course of my career, I've had a few background checks when joining a new company, and honestly, I think all those services are kind of a waste of time. I remember one employer hired a company to do a background check on me, and I had done some startups, and they called me to check on my own employment from a startup. So I don't put a lot of faith in those anyways, and I don't think the employers do as well. It's more about they just did you commit a felony, right? They just want to know that. So is there another question? Or?
Well, I would just add, about 10 years ago, there was research in the spam community that set up lots of experiments like yours and saw, where things tend to get spread from. So I can't cite any of it, but I know that somebody's doing something.
I know. I was just kind of curious.
Yeah, I'd be curious if you had any links to that. I'd be curious to see it. I mean, I know a lot of people have been looking at this over the years, right? There's a ton of tools out there, right, for detecting spam, and they work to some degree or another, but they're, undoubtedly will ultimately fail. And that wasn't my, originally, yes, I wanted to control my spam, but I think, kind of what it turned into was just I didn't want to have to deal with changing my passwords, and it's just me trying to. Not get in the same, not be in that crowd, and running with everyone else in that, and undoubtedly, a few people will get picked off, right? Yeah.
Just one question about trusting password manager. Because in an ideal world, you will not only randomize your email, but also randomize your password.
Yes.
Why would you choose to trust one password manager over another? You're running an Apple, why don't you trust Apple?
I could, but I kind of go from the assumption that, maybe my machine might get compromised. And if it does, and I keep that as the store, then somebody could potentially walk off with it and, exfiltrate the data. So if I want to think about this from a more paranoid perspective, if I keep it on a USB stick and it's only accessible when I plug the stick in, it's just a different model.
USB sticks, and if you don't encrypt data on them, the probability of losing USB stick is higher than
So
somebody.
it's encrypted. I use a hardware encrypting token with a self-destruct feature. So 10 wrong entries in a row, and the device destroys itself.
You mentioned you need a couple of USB sticks because they do go bad.
Correct. Right.
The pain. Password managers can relieve some of that pain.
So I use the password manager, but again, the database is kept on the USB stick. So instead of using the keychain, right, I use an application. For better or for worse, I use the password safe, which is reasonably well known. It may not be the best anymore. I don't know. It's just something I've been using for many years. And I figure I have enough other controls in place that, all right, if there was an issue with that, then I've made it sufficiently difficult, right? If if somebody wants to specifically target me, odds are they probably can, break through my defenses, but they're not usually targeting you specifically. They're trying to go for a mass grab of information, right? So if the government is going to target me, I'm going to be, victimized by the government. And that's just something I accept. Yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you.